What's going on, everybody? Adam from South Harmon Fantasy Football here to bring to you a really exciting episode today. We're going to be touching on the extreme of extremes. So in Dynasty, everybody wants to be young. They want to have young, exciting players on their team, but they also want to blend that really young player with league-winning upside and somebody that can absolute break fantasy. Now, while that is what everybody wants to have, I don't think people really understand that there's a very small group of people that meet this list. Truly having league-winning upside and also being 25 years or younger, that's what I'm going to use, although 25 years at this point really doesn't feel like the youngest of players. I'm going to use that as the threshold, so guys like Christian McCaffrey, A.J. Brown, Tyreek Hill, while they do have league-winning upside, they're not going to fit this profile of both having league-winning upside to absolutely break fantasy. Not just league-winning upside, but I'm talking shatter fantasy football scoring, as well as having youth on their side. We're going to get into three players. Tight ends don't matter, as you know. So we're going to talk the quarterback position, the wide receiver position, and the running back position, one for each. All right, so let's go ahead and start off with the wide receiver position. At this point, the wide receiver position as a whole has the most value and seems to be the hottest item as far as any in the game of Dynasty at Superflex even. The quarterback position as a whole, that list is starting to shrink as far as which QBs are actually meaningful. And some of these quarterbacks in value, once you get outside the top 12 in particular, they're really falling as far as the value in the trade market. You see on Keep Trade Cut, as well as in startups. So what I want to do is touch on the wide receiver position. And there are definitely several candidates that meet this list under 25 years old that do have, league-winning upside at the receiver position. But there's really actually only one in particular, while it is low-hanging fruit here, that I can point to and say we've seen not only league-winning upside, but fantasy game-breaking upside, however, still has yet to hit what I believe is their full fantasy ceiling. Now, when it comes to CeeDee Lamb, I think a lot of you guys need to start calling him Cedarian because you need to start putting him in a different range and stratosphere. Right now, he's still currently below Justin Jefferson for the large majority in Dynasty value, and I get that we're playing for the long haul, but these are both two really young, exciting players, and what I've seen from CeeDee Lamb last year, I don't think people really understand what we witnessed. Tyreek Hill came out in the 23 season. He made a bold prediction that he absolutely will get to this 2,000-yard mark, which would be the most by a receiver ever in a single season. Calvin Johnson currently holding the record at 1,964 yards in a single season, but Tyreek Hill came out of the gates firing on all cylinders and was on pace for the large majority of the season to actually go over this 2,000 yards mark. 2K Tyreek Hill was going to be a thing until, unfortunately, we saw the injury. Now, even after this ankle injury and this derailment of him getting to 2K, Tyreek Hill still finishes at 1,799. Being 1 yard away from 1,800 receiving yards, there's only been 6 receivers that have actually gone north of 1,800 yards. The 6 receivers to do so are Calvin Johnson, Cooper Kupp, Julio Jones, Antonio Brown, the GOAT Jerry Rice himself, and then Justin Jefferson. Well, Adam, CeeDee Lamb's not even on this list, and Justin Jefferson is. I hear you. And while CeeDee Lamb didn't get to this 1,800 yard mark, he did get to 1,749, which is not far behind it at all and still places 9th in NFL history as far as receiving yards go. Now, what I want you to understand about this is, given all that, and the fact that Tyreek Hill did have 1,799 yards, and while Tyreek Hill still finished 50 yards ahead of CeeDee Lamb, and let's remember that yards is not the only stat that's baked into fantasy points scored. When we talk about fantasy points scored, all time, now when we push to that list, 400 fantasy points in a single season, we've only seen 3 people meet that list. That's Cooper Kupp in that year that he did go over 1,900. The GOAT Jerry Rice himself was north of 400. And then we have CeeDee Lamb. CeeDee Lamb with a total of 14 touchdowns, 2 on the ground, with the 1,749 in receiving yards. Only 3 players in NFL history that have gone over 400. All right, Adam, so what you're telling me is he really already had his historic season, so why should we be expecting anything but regression this year? Here's the thing. I want you to take a look at CeeDee Lamb in his season last year and understand that, yes, it was an absolutely ridiculous season that has not been replicated by many. Let's take a look and start diving into his season as a whole, why we have not probably hit the true ceiling of what CeeDee Lamb can offer us. Not saying this is going to come to fruition, but if things hit on all cylinders, CeeDee Lamb has a lot more to capture than what we saw last year. One of the main things to take a look at for Dallas and this entire offense, as well as CeeDee Lamb being the catalyst in this offense, if you take a look at their season last year, we can really take a tale of two halves of the season, although technically not halfway through the year. But if you look at pre-bye and post-bye numbers for this entire Dallas offense, the Dallas Cowboys that we were seeing in those 7 weeks before the bye and the Dallas Cowboys that we saw after the bye, totally different offensive situation, the way that they were kind of running things, and obviously that really dictated a massive surge in what we saw from CeeDee Lamb. So first and foremost, they started using a lot of pre-snap motion, and not just using a lot of that pre-snap motion to try to get the defense to show their hand, but there was also a total different philosophy change where the Dallas Cowboys, towards the later half of the year, they were pushing the ball downfield at some of the highest clip in the entire NFL. But before the bye, the Dallas Cowboys were 23rd in the NFL as far as deep pass percentage. So basically what I'm telling you is that this offense started throwing the ball more, started using a lot of pre-snap motion, and is pushing the ball downfield at extreme clip. So not only is CeeDee Lamb the focal point, the catalyst of this entire offense, and really goated as far as getting that type of target volume, but on top of it, we're looking at him being targeted much deeper down the field, and his overall ceiling absolutely skyrocketed on top of his fantasy floor. If you just take a look at post-bye, the 11 weeks for the Cowboys after the bye in the regular season, CeeDee Lamb in those 11 weeks scored a total of 315.8 fantasy points in 11 weeks. Now, to give you context to how insane that number is, all right, this list that you're going to be looking at here, 315 points, will be slotting just under that. This list right here is the best wide receiver finishes for an entire season in NFL history. CeeDee Lamb in 11 games damn near makes this list on the back half of the season after the NFL bye. Now, to give you context again, that's in 11 games. So even if you want to say there's 16 games versus 17, throw that shit completely out the window. Now, check this part out. If you were to extrapolate out that 11-game sample size into a 17-game sample size, at what we could be looking at for Cedarian Lamb with this Dallas Cowboys offense, trying to replicate, obviously, their success in the second half of the year and definitely post-bye, if they run this offense and run it through CeeDee Lamb for a full season, that right there is 488 fantasy points in the season. That would absolutely shatter not just what we're likely to see from the large majority of impact players at the wide receiver position, but that would destroy Cooper Kupp's numbers and Jerry Rice's numbers, which were some of the best fantasy seasons we've ever seen at the receiver position, and would obviously destroy what CeeDee Lamb did last year in what was the #1 season last year. And the truth is, as much as I love Tyreek Hill, and he does have significant upside that you can't debate, CeeDee Lamb probably has the highest upside of any player at the wide receiver position going into the 2024 season. We'll see how defenses adjust, but the truth is, CeeDee Lamb, he's not just young, he has upside that's almost unmatched on a yearly basis, and we're still not valuing this guy as the #1 receiver in Dynasty. Obviously, he's in that tier for a lot of people now, and he's certainly in that conversation. But the fact that he isn't at least the consensus wide receiver 1 in Dynasty right now, starting to make me question things a little bit as far as where we have him valued. Maybe Fizzle was right. We could be looking at the wide receiver GOAT. Now, when it comes to the quarterback position, I'm sure many of you may want to throw your hat in the ring for a lot of the young, exciting quarterbacks in the game of Dynasty today. Caleb Williams being the #1 overall pick, going to the situation with a great nucleus around him. We normally don't see a quarterback with that type of pedigree going to a situation with DJ Moore, Rome Odunze, and Keenan Allen around him on this offense. And you're probably saying a guy like CJ Stroud has a ton of upside. But here's the thing. When it comes to true, uncapped, raw upside that can be completely league-shattering and break fantasy records, there's only one person that meets this list. And if you're thinking of anybody other than Anthony Richardson, when you leave this video, you will not be able to say that anybody has this type of upside ever at the quarterback position. I'm here to put that out on wax. Now, while the floor is certainly low on a guy like Anthony Richardson, we saw last year him leave 2 games early out of only playing 4 for the entire year. And his style certainly is going to lend him the opportunity to get hurt again. And what we're talking about right now isn't really the floor or the range of outcomes. We're talking about if everybody hits their high-end range of outcomes, who can break fantasy football for the season in those 4 games. I don't think people really understand this. If you just extrapolated that out, understanding that in those 4 games, he left 2 of the games after only playing a third of them. But if you just extrapolated out those numbers for those 4 games for a full season, assuming he stayed healthy, which obviously he's going to need to stay healthy to hit his highest ceiling. But if we assume that this type of play continues for 17 games, so essentially he'd be leaving every other game after only playing a third of it, he would break the record for rushing touchdowns by a quarterback in a single season. Throughout those 4 games, while leaving 2 of them extremely early, he still ran for 4 touchdowns. In one game, we saw him, in only playing a third of it, have on 3 rushes 2 rushing touchdowns. Now, I want you to understand how crazy that is. And based on what we saw last year, Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts both tied and posted the NFL record for a quarterback at 15 rushing touchdowns in a season. That's an insane number of rushing touchdowns for a quarterback relative to what we've seen in the past. Now, when it comes to physical stature, obviously, like I said, Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts, 2 of the most physical imposing in the NFL. But Anthony Richardson, he's Jalen Hurts with an additional 20 pounds. He's Josh Allen with another 10 pounds. But here's the thing. Those guys, while they are athletic quarterbacks, they don't offer anywhere near the long speed that Anthony Richardson does. Anthony Richardson has the physical tools in a Shane Steichen-led offense to absolutely replicate numbers that Jalen Hurts has in Shane Steichen's offense, which was 13 rushing touchdowns in 2022. But with an additional 20 pounds in his type of athletic profile, this guy's Jalen Hurts plus as an athlete. People don't really understand. At 244 pounds, he ran a 4.4340, which was actually at the NFL Combine. Not any of these Mickey Mouse 40-yard dashes at a pro day. He actually ran it at the Combine at 4.43. And the reason I want to highlight that is Anthony Richardson last year, when you take a look at his runs, he was a little bit over 5 yards per carry, but he actually never popped one of these long ones. But we have seen, at his time at Florida, we saw him run away from all the SEC defenders with an 81-yard run. This is a guy that not only carries that high-end upside at the red zone and scoring double-digit touchdowns, which is few and far between that we've ever seen at the quarterback position, he also has the long speed to run away from people on the NFL field. Now, the numbers we're looking at here, this is the NFL Combine data since the year 2000. Now, when we take a look at the quarterback position as a whole, there's only been one quarterback that's ran a sub 4.4 at the NFL Combine. That's Michael Vick. You have to go back, obviously, quite a ways. And Michael Vick, as we know, one of the most insane athletes as well at the quarterback position. Reggie McNeil ran a 4.40, and then you have at 4.41 RG3, obviously a track star coming out of Baylor. And then you have Anthony Richardson at a 4.43. There's some really insane athletes on this list. There's been 3 faster 40 times. When you take a look at the weight of these guys, Michael Vick at 210, Reggie McNeil was sub 200, and then you have 223 RG3. You got to add an additional 30 plus pounds to Michael Vick, and you got to add an additional 20 plus pounds to RG3. So not only is he one of the fastest quarterbacks that we've ever seen categorized as a quarterback in the NFL, when we take a look at 40 times across all the positions by weight, so if we filter it out, 244 pounds as the minimum. And when you take a look at this list right here, okay, first of all, let's just acknowledge there's some insane athletes on this list: Vernon Davis, Micah Parsons, Montez Sweat, Bruce Irvin, Von Miller. Not only is this list the freak show of freak shows as far as guys that are in the range of running this type of a 40 with that type of weight, but what are we looking at? What I'm basically trying to show you here is Anthony Richardson, as far as an athlete. When you see a body type like Anthony Richardson, I just want you to really have a full handle and understanding that you're looking at some of the most freak athletes that are edge rushers or linebackers in the NFL. This guy, though, he just happens to be playing quarterback, and I don't think that's really hit people. We just haven't seen enough of A-Rich. But when we did see him play full games, he was quarterback 4 and quarterback 2 on the week. This is a guy that's extremely athletic, arguably one of the biggest freak shows in the entire sport of the NFL, which all it is freak shows. And Anthony Richardson just so happens to be playing the quarterback position. And when we take a look at that type of athletic profile, the Shane Steichen offense, you see a guy like Justin Fields and what he could do with runs of 67 and 61 yards. You see A-Rich having an 81-yard run in college. We just haven't seen him play long enough to pop one of these insanely long rushes. And you take a look at a guy like Terrell Pryor, who obviously converted to wide receiver after playing quarterback for a while. He was 6'4", 233 pounds, ran a very similar 40-yard dash, and ran a 93-yard run to the house. Anthony Richardson's upside is different than Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts because not only does he have that red zone ability to run around the goal line and score touchdowns, physically imposing through you, but he has the ability to take any single run and get outside and run past anyone at any position. The upside that he has as far as touchdowns, plus the ability to have those type of runs, puts him in the category much more similarly to guys like Justin Fields, Lamar Jackson. What I'm trying to explain to you is just from the rushing element, if he was to stay healthy for a full year and we saw him hit the ceiling, this is a guy that can go north of 1,000 yards rushing as well as hitting double-digit touchdowns. Shane Steichen running this offense now. They've added Adonai Mitchell. That doesn't even touch what he can do in the passing game. And this is a guy that looked a lot better as a passer than we wanted to give him credit for coming out of the University of Florida. Shane Steichen's already done this with Jalen Hurts. If you take a look at his 2022 season, This is a guy that had 700 plus rushing yards as well as 13 touchdowns on the ground in 2022. If we were just to extrapolate out that 4-game sample size and be conservative about this, knowing he missed a ton of time during those 4 games, he's basically going to get very close to the rushing numbers Jalen Hurts had at basically 700 rushing yards a game as well as 17 rushing touchdowns. So realistically, if he stays healthy, the floor for A-Rich is very similar to that 2022 Jalen Hurts that we saw. Newsflash, that Jalen Hurts in 2022 was damn near 30 fantasy points per game in 6-point per passing touchdown league. A-Rich has the ability to get there if he stays healthy, but also has the ability to take that yardage to the next level that we've only seen 4 people get inside that 1,000-yard rushing season. If he breaks out and has a fully healthy season, this guy could absolutely shatter anything that we've ever seen from a quarterback in the fantasy game. If you want to swing for the fences, the moonshot is absolutely Anthony Richardson. Now, when we get to the running back position, this one in particular is probably going to be a little controversial. And frankly, I could make cases for a lot of different running backs in this range. But obviously, everyone's going to be expecting one of Bijan Robinson, Jahmyr Gibbs, or Breece Hall. This is not a knock on those 3 in particular. But here's the truth. Achane last year, even with the injury riddledness that he had, and you have 2 games in which he played less than 20% of the snaps. In week 2, he played 10% of the snaps, and then coming off of the injury, he got hurt basically right away in that next game and only played 4% of the snaps. With those 2 weeks included into his points per game, he still bested all those guys last year in his rookie season. We started to see him scratch the surface, and we've obviously seen what the upside is for Achane when he's playing and given the touches. This is a guy that, remember, had 4 touchdowns and over 200 yards on the ground, over 50 points in a game. What I want to do is pull up this list here for you. This is the list of every player that has ever had 50 fantasy points in a game. There is a ton of running backs on this list, but the large majority of them are the running backs when we think about when we were playing the game at a totally different time period. And the reality was at that point, everybody was chasing the hammer running backs, and they were littered as far as what people wanted in the first round. You take a look at the guys on this list: LaDainian Tomlinson, Sean Alexander, Barry Sanders. This is a different time period. Basically, when we're looking at the time period currently, and if we go ahead and see who's on this list at the running back position starting at 2020 and ahead, the only guys on this list are Joe Mixon in that insane game that he put together, as well as Jonathan Taylor. So the reality is, Achane, while we're saying we would love to see him have a full-time role, realistically, we don't need to see him have a full-time role. All we need to do is see him capture that 1A role like he was getting in certain spots last year, where he's getting, 12 to 15 touches a game, because he can take any run in this insanely wild offense that Miami has to the house and has touchdown upside that's almost unmatched across the NFL, even from a lot of these really exciting young backs in the game of Dynasty today. You could definitely say Achane is risky and overpriced in the 4th round of startups or where he is on keep trade cut. I would not put him in the same mix as those elite running backs that we talked about with Jahmyr Gibbs, Bijan Robinson, and Breece Hall as far as Dynasty value goes because of market, and I think that the floor is much higher for those other guys. But the truth is, when we talk about ceiling and who could be a true league winner with unmatched potential in this game and actually break fantasy, Achane has really only shown us a sliver of what could be a absolutely unheard of season for the running back position in the NFL that we have today. And he's going to probably have a chance to do that even on part-time snaps. There's all kinds of conjecture out there with him bulking up in the offseason, but really a lot of that stuff I'm not even baking in to this situation here. Raheem Mostert had over 20 rushing touchdowns. This is an offense that's extremely good, extremely efficient, and obviously has speed everywhere. As Pat Summerall used to say, speed kills. Even with a non-traditional bell cow type role, he could have a league-winning and fantasy-breaking type season in this Dolphins offense if he's to stay healthy, while he certainly does not have the same floor as some other guys at the running back position. If we're talking about just ceiling and breaking fantasy, Achane is the running back that meets this list. Obviously, this time of year and just in general in Dynasty, it's really easy to focus on accruing as much Dynasty value as possible, trying to do tier down strategies. None of us really want to overpay for assets in Dynasty, but I think it's important to at least talk about, if you're a gambler and you want to swing for the fences, not saying that they're necessarily the safest investments in guys like A-Rich and Achane. Those are the types that have absolutely ridiculous league-winning upside, and CD Lamb, while you could argue that he's at a ridiculous price at a peak in Dynasty value, paying all of that right now certainly is not going to be for the faint of heart. But if you are one of those guys that's a truther for CD Lamb and you want to pay up the full boat price, while technically in Dynasty value or in market there's not much for him to gain, if he has the highest ceiling output, there's a conversation where this time next year, CD Lamb is the undisputed wide receiver 1 in Dynasty. And based on what the market says for wide receivers in this game, he could be one of the few wide receivers that could go past some of the elite quarterbacks at the position because he is such a difference maker. And if you take a look at WARP, wins over replacement player, if he was to actually score 488 type points in a season, the WARP on Cedarian Lamb would be absolutely fucking outrageous. Let me know what you thought of this video down in the comments. If you're new to the channel, make sure you go down and hit that subscribe button. And I'll see you back here talking more on the game of Dynasty. I'm out of here. Peace.